I'm James, 34 years old, and my own family left me stranded without a room at a five-star resort because, in their eyes, I wasn't real family. Before I tell you how that single, calculated act of humiliation triggered a chain of events that led to their complete financial devastation and unearthed a betrayal so deep it almost destroyed our family's legacy, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps to know who you're sharing your deepest battle scars with. The whole thing went down, as most dramas in the Mitchell family did, under the guise of tradition. It was the week of Thanksgiving, and the annual family gathering was being held at the Breakers in Palm Beach. This wasn't just any holiday trip. This was the big one. My grandfather, William Mitchell, the patriarch and founder of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, was 78. After a mild health scare the year before, he decided it was time to formally announce his succession plan. The future of a $180 million fortune and a life-saving company hung in the balance. The air in sunny Florida felt heavy with anticipation and greed. I arrived on a Wednesday morning, the valet taking my modest sedan while a gleaming Bentley that I knew belonged to my brother was being polished nearby. I wasn't there for the glamour or the prestige. I was there because my grandfather had personally called and asked me to be. "It's important, James," he'd said. "I want you there." For a man who'd spent his life feeling like an afterthought, those words were a command. I walked through the ornate archways into the lobby. It was like stepping into another world, one of hushed tones, colossal flower arrangements, and the quiet, confident hum of old money. I spotted them instantly. My family, perfect tableau of dysfunction. My brother, Thomas, 2 years my senior and a lifetime ahead in favoritism, was holding court near the check-in desk. He was wearing an Armani suit that shimmered under the chandeliers, a uniform of unearned success. His wife, Rebecca, a woman who had weaponized social media into an art form, was posing for a selfie, her lips pulled into a practiced pout. The hashtag, I was sure, would be something nauseating like #family-tradition or #blessed. And then there were my parents, George and Margaret. They flanked Thomas like royal guards, my father beaming with a pride he never once showed me, my mother preening, soaking in the reflected glory of her golden son. I took a deep breath, pasted on a neutral expression, and headed for the front desk. I ordered a black coffee from the adjacent cafe, the warmth of the cup a small comfort in my hands. "Good morning," I said to the polite young woman behind the counter, checking in. "The name is James Mitchell." She smiled warmly and began typing. Her fingers danced across the keyboard. Then they slowed. A small frown creased her brow. She typed my name again, more deliberately this time. "Mitchell. James Mitchell," she murmured to herself. "That's odd. Is there a problem?" I asked, a familiar knot tightening in my stomach. She looked up, her professional smile faltering. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Mitchell, but I can't seem to find your reservation. We have a suite for a Mr. and Mrs. George Mitchell, and a villa for a Mr. Thomas Mitchell, but nothing under your name." The knot in my stomach turned to ice. As if my body was responding to a signal my brain hadn't processed yet, my hand went numb. The coffee cup slipped, hitting the polished marble with a sickening crack. Hot, dark liquid splashed across my shoes and pooled on the pristine floor, a spreading stain of shame. The sound drew their attention. Thomas sauntered over, not with concern, but with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood. He glanced down at the mess, then up at me, a slow, cruel smirk spreading across his face. "Having some trouble, little brother?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper loud enough for the clerk and anyone nearby to hear. "I handled the bookings this year, and I only made reservations for our real family." He let the word real hang in the air, a poisoned dart aimed straight at my heart. I flinched, not physically, but somewhere deep inside. A part of me that had always hoped, always tried, finally shattered. I looked past his smug face to my parents, a desperate, silent plea in my eyes. "Say something, please. For once, stand up for me." Nothing. My mother suddenly became intensely interested in a painting on the far wall. My father, the man whose approval I had craved my entire life, turned his broad back to me, a gesture of dismissal more final than any words. He was siding with Thomas. He was confirming it. I was not real. A strange calm washed over me. The burning humiliation was still there, but it was being rapidly cooled by a wave of pure, cold clarity. This wasn't a slight. This wasn't a mistake. This was a statement, an excommunication. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't make a scene. I looked Thomas dead in the eye, held his gaze for a long moment, and then I simply nodded. I turned, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent lobby, and walked straight out the door, leaving them with my shame spilled on their perfect floor. The doorman hailed me a taxi. As I sank into the leather seat, the hot Florida air feeling cold on my skin, I pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I wasn't calling a friend to vent. I wasn't booking a different hotel. I was making a different kind of reservation. I dialed my grandfather's number. He answered on the second ring. "James? I thought you'd be here by now." I said, my voice quiet, level, betraying none of the hurricane inside me. There was a problem with my room. I quickly, factually told him what had happened. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "Where are you now?" "In a taxi." "Good," he said, and his voice had changed. The grandfatherly warmth was gone, replaced by the steel of the CEO who built an empire. "You did the right thing to walk away. Now you listen to me. I need you to do something." "Anything," I said. "I'm going to handle this. But this is bigger than a hotel room. This is about the future of everything I've built. The first shot has been fired, James. Not by you, but at you. It's time to fire back." I hung up the phone, a cold resolve settling deep in my bones. This was no longer just about family. This was about a legacy, and I had just been handed the keys to the armory. To understand the cold resolve I felt in that taxi, you have to understand that the wound Thomas inflicted wasn't fresh. He'd only poured salt into a cut that had been carved into me over a lifetime. The injustice of Palm Beach was just a public performance of a private play that had been running for 30 years. My childhood home in Connecticut was a beautiful, spacious colonial, but it always felt like there was only enough oxygen in it for one son to breathe freely. Thomas, being the firstborn, inhaled all of it. He was the sun around which my parents orbited, and I was a distant, forgotten planet. Their love wasn't rationed. It was directed. It flowed to him in a torrent, leaving me with only the occasional, indifferent trickle. I remember being 8 years old. Thomas was 10. My father came home one day with a brand new, top-of-the-line tennis racket for him. "For the future champion," he'd boomed, ruffling Thomas's hair. That weekend, my father spent hours on the court at the country club with Thomas, teaching him how to serve. I sat on the sidelines trying to get his attention, asking if I could try. "Not now, James," my father would say without looking at me. "I'm coaching your brother. Go play on the swings." I spent years on those swings watching them. When I turned 16, I wanted a car. Not a new one, just something to get me to school and back. My father sat me down. "A car is a responsibility, James," he'd said gravely. "You need to earn it." So I got a job. I spent my Friday nights and weekends bussing tables at a greasy spoon diner called the Corner Booth. I'd come home smelling of fried onions and dishwater, my feet aching, and stash my cash tips in a shoebox under my bed. It took me a year to save enough for a beat-up '98 Honda Civic. The day I bought it, my father inspected it, kicked the tires, and said, "Well, at least you learned the value of $1. That same year, for Thomas's 18th birthday, my parents bought him a brand new BMW convertible. It was a surprise. They parked it in the driveway with a giant red bow on it. "To celebrate your future," my mother had said, kissing his cheek. When I quietly asked what he had done to earn it, she gave me a frosty look. "Don't be jealous, James. Your brother has a lot of pressure on him. He needs to look the part." The pressure, as far as I could see, was choosing which European country to visit for his summer of discovery after graduation, a trip my parents happily funded. My summer of discovery, was spent in the dusty stacks of the local library, studying for my SATs. The pressure on me was the silent, crushing weight of knowing that my only way out, my only way to prove my worth, was to be so undeniably excellent that even they couldn't ignore it. The pinnacle of this disparity came on a spring afternoon during my senior year of high school. The mail arrived. I saw a thick envelope from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Harvard. My hands trembled as I opened it in the privacy of my room. The first word I saw was, "Congratulations." I sank onto my bed, the letter shaking in my grip. A full academic scholarship. I hadn't just gotten in, they were going to pay for it. It was a validation of every late night, every weekend I'd sacrificed, every moment I'd felt invisible. I practically floated downstairs, bursting to tell someone. But the sound of popping corks and laughter stopped me in the hallway. I peeked into the dining room. My parents, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle were all there, raising champagne glasses. Thomas stood in the center, a smug grin on his face. My father cleared his throat for a toast. To Thomas, on his acceptance to Penn State. "We all knew you could do it, son. A future business leader." Penn State, a decent school, but one he'd gotten into by the skin of his teeth, thanks to a hefty donation from my grandfather and my father calling in every favor he had. I looked at the joy on my parents' faces, a joy I had never once seen directed at me. I looked at my Harvard acceptance letter, a document representing the pinnacle of academic achievement, and I realized it meant nothing in this house. My success was my own, and therefore it was worthless to them. I quietly folded the letter, slipped it into my back pocket, and went back upstairs. The silence of my room was my only companion in celebration. I chose to work at Meridian Pharmaceuticals after college for one reason: my grandfather. William Mitchell was a force of nature. He saw something in me, a focus and a scientific curiosity that reminded him of his younger self. He was the only one who ever asked about my research, his eyes lighting up when I explained the complex molecular structures I was working on. He was my ally, my only one. This quiet alliance was cemented a year before the Palm Beach disaster. William suffered a mild stroke. It was a warning shot from his own body. I was terrified. I was at the hospital within the hour. For the next 2 weeks, I arranged my life around his recovery. I'd work a full day at the lab, then drive to the hospital and spend my evenings with him. Sometimes we'd talk. Sometimes I'd read him the Wall Street Journal. Sometimes we'd just watch the city lights come on in silence. It was a quiet companionship that felt more real than any loud, performative family dinner I'd ever endured. My family's presence was, predictably, a performance. Thomas and Rebecca would visit for precisely 15 minutes, long enough to take a well-lit photo with a recovering William for her Instagram feed. The caption was always a masterpiece of insincerity. "So grateful our patriarch is strong and fighting. #family over everything." Then they'd sweep out, complaining about the antiseptic smell and rushing to make a dinner reservation. My parents' visits were just as hollow, filled with anxious chatter about Thomas's latest deal, and how this health scare was so inconvenient for their winter travel plans. It was during one of my quiet evenings with William that he asked for my help. "James," he said, his voice a bit slurred but his mind still sharp, "I need you to go to the house. In my study, there's a file cabinet. I need you to organize my personal financial records. My mind, it's not what it used to be. I need a pair of eyes I can trust implicitly." The weight of those words, "eyes I can trust implicitly," was immense. It was the approval I had been starving for my entire life. That weekend, I let myself into his grand, silent house. The study was my favorite room, a sanctuary of mahogany, leather, and the smell of old paper. I spent hours sorting through trusts, deeds, and stock certificates. It was in the bottom drawer of his main filing cabinet that I found a simple manila folder labeled Family and Trust Stipends. I told myself I shouldn't look. It was a violation of the trust he'd just placed in me. But a stronger, more wounded part of me needed to know. I opened it. The contents felt like a punch to the gut. It was a meticulously kept ledger of monthly wire transfers from a family trust. The entries went back over a decade. Thomas Mitchell, $40,000. George and Margaret Mitchell, $25,000. Month after month, year after year, a river of gold flowing endlessly to them. My brother was clearing nearly $500,000 a year, tax-free, for doing nothing. My parents, who had their own substantial retirement funds, were pocketing an additional $300,000. My hands started to shake. I scrolled through the list of beneficiaries for each year, my finger tracing the names. My name was nowhere. I had never received a single dollar. The shoebox of greasy $1 bills under my bed flashed in my mind. The ramen noodle dinners, the second-hand textbooks, the crushing weight of student loans that I was still paying off. All of it while they were living lives of effortless luxury, funded by a fortune I was biologically a part of but practically excluded from. Buried deeper in the file were printed out emails between my grandfather and Marcus Reynolds, the company CFO. Marcus's warnings were polite but firm. William Thomas's spending habits are a significant drain. More concerningly, he is using his status as a future Meridian heir to secure high-risk personal loans. Another read, I must advise a formal review of the family trust distributions. They are unsustainable and, frankly, inequitable. My grandfather's replies were brief and dismissive. He's young. He'll learn. They are my family, Marcus. I will take care of them. He knew. He had known for years. He knew they were bleeding the trust dry, knew Thomas was a liability, knew I was getting nothing. And he had allowed it. His inaction was a form of consent. His trust in me now felt like a desperate, last-ditch effort to find someone to clean up a mess he'd let fester for years. I carefully put every paper back in the folder, closed the drawer, and left the study. I never mentioned it to him, but the knowledge of it sat inside me like a shard of glass. So, when I sat in that taxi in Palm Beach, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The hotel room wasn't an oversight. It was a message, the same message they had been sending me my entire life. You are not one of us. You are on the outside. You do not matter. And as I made that call to my grandfather, I realized they were right. I wasn't one of them. I wasn't entitled. I wasn't weak. And I was done being on the outside. I was about to kick down the door. The 15-minute taxi ride from the breakers was the crucible where a lifetime of resentment was forged into a weapon. The driver, a man named Michael with kind eyes who had probably seen every kind of human drama play out in his rearview mirror, thankfully remained silent. After my grandfather's chilling words, "It's time to fire back," the world seemed to shift on its axis. He told me he was activating a financial protocol he and Marcus Reynolds had wargamed for just such a catastrophic failure of family ethics. He called it the purification. It sounded biblical, felt final. He instructed me to check into the Four Seasons on his personal account and to turn off my phone for a few hours. Let the storm gather, he'd said. They need to feel the full force of their arrogance. I did as he said. The suite he'd booked for me was magnificent, with a balcony overlooking the churning Atlantic. But I couldn't enjoy it. I stood there, watching the waves crash against the shore, my phone dark and silent on the marble countertop. I was a general waiting for the first reports from the battlefield. The first explosion happened at a poolside bar at the Breakers. Thomas, in an act of supreme tone-deaf arrogance, had decided to celebrate my departure by ordering a $1,200 bottle of champagne for his friends. When the waiter returned with the credit card machine, Thomas presented his exclusive, by-invitation-only Amex Black Card with a flourish. Declined. His smirk faltered. "Run it again," he snapped, his voice a little too loud. The waiter obliged. Declined. A nervous sweat beaded on Thomas's brow. He threw another card on the table, a platinum Visa. Declined. Then a gold MasterCard. Declined. A wave of snickers rippled through the nearby tables. His face, moments before flushed with triumph, was now a blotchy, furious red. The public humiliation he had so casually inflicted upon me was now being returned to him with interest. Meanwhile, Rebecca's world was imploding digitally. As she lounged on a cabana bed, scrolling through photos of herself, her phone began to vibrate with a series of frantic, sterile notifications. An email from Cartier. Your credit line has been temporarily suspended. A text from her personal shopper at Saks. Hi Rebecca. My system is showing all your cards as frozen. Please advise. An alert from her bank. Account access has been restricted pending a security review. Please contact your branch. Her carefully constructed empire of effortless luxury, built entirely on my family's money, was dissolving pixel by pixel. The final, most devastating blow landed on my parents. They were in the middle of a phone call with the sales director of the opulent retirement community they planned to move into, finalizing the details. It was their crowning achievement, a place to live out their golden years in pampered comfort. The sales director cleared his throat. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, he said, his voice now stripped of its warmth. I'm afraid the wire transfer for your $150,000 deposit has been rejected due to insufficient funds from the originating account. My mother reportedly dropped the phone. The trust account, their personal ATM for over a decade, had been shut off at the source. When I finally turned my phone back on 3 hours later, it was a war zone. Dozens of missed calls. A string of increasingly hysterical text messages. Thomas, where are you? What did you do? Call me now. Rebecca, James, this isn't funny. People are looking at us. You have to fix this. Mom, James, your father is having chest pains. You have caused a terrible scene. You need to call your grandfather and apologize immediately. The manipulative genius of that last text almost made me laugh. My father's convenient chest pains were a classic move. I decided to answer the next call. It was Rebecca. Her voice was unrecognizable. A high-pitched shriek of pure panic. James, thank God. What is going on? Did something happen to your grandfather? Our money. It's gone. We can't pay for anything. I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. Rebecca? I said, my voice a calm, cool island in her storm of hysteria. Thomas was very clear. I'm not part of the real family. This sounds like a real family problem. Don't you dare be sarcastic with me, she screeched. This is your fault. You and your jealousy. You've always been jealous of Thomas. Is that what he told you? I asked, genuinely curious. No, Rebecca. I was never jealous of his money. I was disgusted by his character. There's a difference. She started to sob then, a desperate, theatrical sound. Please, James, think of Ethan. He was so excited to see you. He drew you a picture. He's been asking for you all day while Thomas and I had to attend this dreadful charity luncheon. The casual cruelty of that statement. Admitting she'd farmed her son out to a nanny so she could party, then using him as a shield, solidified my resolve into something harder than diamond. That's a shame, I said, my voice flat. Perhaps if you and Thomas weren't so busy at dreadful luncheons, you would have had time to teach your son that character is more important than cash. I have nothing more to say to you. I hung up. The next call was from my mother. Her voice was trembling with rage. James Michael Mitchell, I don't know what you said to your grandfather, but you have gone too far. You are tearing this family apart over a petty squabble. A petty squabble? I repeated, the words tasting like acid. Mom, your son, my brother, publicly disowned me in front of a dozen people while you and Dad stood by and watched. He declared me not real family. That's not a squabble. That's an execution. I just decided not to lie down and die. You've always been so dramatic, so sensitive. She shot back. Thomas has a certain position to uphold. You don't understand the pressure he's under. The pressure. I finally let out a laugh, a bitter, barking sound. You want to talk about pressure? Let's talk about the pressure of working 2 jobs to pay for college while my brother vacations in Monaco. Let's talk about the pressure of developing a drug that could save millions of lives while he pressures grandfather for a bigger allowance. Don't you dare talk to me about pressure. You ungrateful child, she stammered, fresh out of arguments. No, Mom, I said softly. I'm just finally done. Done trying. Done caring what you think. This is the world you all created. It's time you learned to live in it. I ended the call. Finally, Thomas. He didn't even say hello. You're a dead man, he hissed, his voice a low, venomous growl. "When I find you, I'll kill you with my bare hands. You think you're so clever, you little lab rat? You've been a pathetic little nothing your whole life, and you're still nothing." I let him spew his impotent rage, listening to the childish threats. When he finally paused for breath, I spoke. My voice was dangerously quiet. "Are you finished?" The silence on his end was telling. "Because now you'll listen to me," I continued. "For 30 years, you've been living a fantasy, paid for by the work and genius of a better man. You've confused your allowance with an achievement. You called me a lab rat. You're right. And a lab rat learns one thing very well, Thomas: cause and effect. You are the cause. And I am the effect. You think this is about a hotel room? You think this is about money? You are so much smaller than you imagine. This is about a legacy you were never worthy of and a future you just lost." "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his rage replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. "You'll find out," I said. "You're worried about your credit cards today. By the time I'm done, you'll be worried about your freedom." I hung up the phone and walked out onto the balcony. The wind from the ocean was cool and clean. The storm had made landfall. The panic was just the beginning. The real pain, the real consequences were yet to come, and I would be the one to deliver them. The days that followed were a masterclass in strategic silence. I remained in Palm Beach, a ghost haunting the periphery of my family's implosion. They had retreated from the breakers in disgrace, holing up in a rented condo, their world shrinking with every decline transaction. I used this time to move from defense to offense. Justice, I was learning, wasn't an emotion. It was a dossier. It was evidence. It was a plan. My war room was the business center of the Four Seasons. My sole ally on the ground was Marcus Reynolds. He flew down from New York under the guise of a pre-planned vacation and met me in a secluded library off the hotel lobby. Marcus was a man built of right angles and quiet integrity. For years, he'd been forced to be the silent accountant of my family's excesses, his duty to my grandfather overriding his better judgment. Now, with William's blessing, that dam of professional restraint had broken. "He told me to give you everything," Marcus said, his voice a low murmur as he pushed a military-grade encrypted laptop across the table. He said, and I quote, "James has the mind of a scientist and the heart of a Mitchell. Thomas has the appetites of a Roman emperor and the ethics of an alley cat. It's time to back the right horse." For the next 5 hours, Marcus walked me through the digital labyrinth of my family's finances. It was a sickening journey. What I had seen in the paper files was a child's drawing compared to this high-definition portrait of greed. Thomas hadn't just been padding his expenses. He'd established a sophisticated system of self-enrichment. His luxury fashion consulting firm, which consisted of nothing more than a website and a P.O. box, had an exclusive, multi-million-dollar retainer with Meridian's marketing department. He was approving his own invoices for services like brand synergy analysis and demographic outreach, effectively paying himself for doing absolutely nothing. It was blatant, unapologetic corporate fraud. "I tried to flag this for your grandfather years ago," Marcus said, rubbing his tired eyes. "William just waved it away. Let the boy have his hobbies," he said. He couldn't see, or didn't want to see, that his son's hobby was embezzlement. But the truly terrifying discovery was the web of personal debt Thomas had spun. Marcus showed me the loan documents. Thomas had borrowed millions from high-risk private lenders, the kind of people who don't file lawsuits when you default. They send men in dark suits to have a conversation. He'd secured these loans by using his future inheritance, his block of Meridian stock, as collateral. He sold his future to pay for his past, Marcus explained, his finger tracing a column of terrifying numbers. "The problem is, the loan covenants are predatory. If Meridian's stock value drops by even 10%, or if his personal net worth is questioned, they can call the entire loan due immediately. He's a house of cards in a hurricane." This gave me my first move. It wouldn't be a cannon blast from my grandfather, but a precise legal sniper shot from me. Guided by Marcus, I contacted a top-tier corporate law firm in New York. We drafted a formal letter of notification to each of Thomas's lenders. The letter was a masterpiece of professional intimidation. It stated that as a concerned party and a significant figure within Meridian Pharmaceuticals, I had initiated a full audit of the Mitchell Family Trust, and that the ownership and liquidity of Thomas Mitchell's pledged shares could not be guaranteed pending the outcome of this review. We sent it via certified mail. The effect was instantaneous. These lenders weren't in the business of risk. They were in the business of guaranteed returns. The idea that their collateral was potentially worthless sent them into a panic. They immediately froze Thomas's lines of credit and began demanding proof of solvency. I hadn't taken his money away. I had simply revealed the truth. He didn't have any to begin with. The vice was tightening. In the midst of this financial warfare, I received the call that would expose the moral bankruptcy at the heart of it all. The caller ID was blocked. "Is this James Mitchell?" a hesitant voice asked. "It is. Who's this?" "My name is Daniel Cooper. You don't know me, but I used to be married to Rebecca." I sat bolt upright. "Go on. Look, I'm sorry to bother you," he said, and I could hear the genuine pain in his voice. "But I'm worried about my son, Ethan. Rebecca's been systematically cutting me out of his life, making excuses, ignoring my calls. I pay my child support like clockwork, but she treats me like I'm a deadbeat. I saw her Instagram go dark, and I heard through a friend that there was some kind of family implosion in Florida, and my first thought was just, Ethan, is he okay?" I assured him that as far as I knew, Ethan was physically fine. Then Daniel, with a weary sigh, filled in the history I never knew. He told me how Rebecca had been having an affair with Thomas for the better part of a year while they were still married. She hadn't just left him. She had executed a meticulously planned exit strategy. She had charmed my parents, secured Thomas's financial commitment, and only then had she served Daniel with divorce papers. "She told me I lacked vision," Daniel said with a hollow laugh. "She said I was content with a small life. What she meant was, my salary as a high school history teacher couldn't compete with the Mitchell Family Trust Fund. She traded up. I just don't want my son to inherit her values." His call was a gift. It provided context and motive. Rebecca wasn't just a materialistic spouse. She was a co-conspirator, a ruthless operator who had been complicit in this charade from the very beginning. Armed with this new knowledge, I spent the next 2 days buried in the Meridian server files Marcus had given me access to. I was looking for something more, a final, definitive piece of evidence. And late on the second night, fueled by coffee and a cold rage, I found it. It was in a password-protected subfolder labeled TM Futures. Inside was a chain of emails between Thomas's personal account and a senior partner at Kensington Capital, a notoriously predatory private equity firm known for hostile takeovers. The emails laid out the entire endgame. It was far worse than just covering his debts. Thomas was actively plotting to betray the entire company. His plan was to collude with Kensington. Once he inherited his full block of shares upon William's death, he would use their capital to launch a leveraged buyout, seizing a controlling interest in the company. Then, as his own words in one email stated, his plan was to liquidate the non-essential R&D divisions immediately. That's where the old man has all the cash tied up. Sell the patents, including the Alzheimer's project, to the highest bidder. Dismantle the legacy and walk away with a 9-figure payday. I felt the blood drain from my face. I read the email again and again. He was going to destroy our grandfather's life's work. He was going to sell off a potential cure for Alzheimer's disease, the very research I was pouring my soul into, to fund a few more years of yachts and champagne. This wasn't just greed. This was nihilism. This was a son willing to burn down his own father's kingdom for a suitcase of gold. I printed out the emails. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with an absolute righteous fury. The game had changed. This was no longer about family injustice. This was about corporate treason. And I had the signed, dated confession. The boardroom was waiting. The emergency board meeting was convened on a Friday morning. The chosen venue, Boardroom C on the top floor of the Meridian Tower, felt less like a corporate meeting space and more like a tribunal. The room was dominated by a colossal mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the tense, expectant faces of the half-dozen people seated around it. The air was cold, sterile, and thick with the unspoken gravity of the moment. Outside, a brilliant New York skyline stretched to the horizon, a world away from the judgment about to take place within these four walls. I arrived early with Marcus Reynolds at my side. I was dressed in a simple, dark navy suit, the unofficial uniform of sober proceedings. I felt calm, my nerves settled by the weight of the evidence in my briefcase. This was my territory now. Not a world of emotions and family dynamics, but a world of facts, figures, and consequences. The other board members, 3 independent directors who were old colleagues of my grandfather, filed in and took their seats, their faces etched with confusion and concern. They had been summoned with no agenda other than a matter of grave corporate security. My father, George, came in next. He looked lost, his usual bluster completely gone, replaced by a gray, anxious pallor. He avoided my gaze, sinking into a chair as if its weight were too much to bear. And then Thomas arrived. He made an entrance, of course. He strode in 5 minutes late, wearing a suit that was just a little too flashy, a defiant smirk plastered on his face. He was trying to project an image of a man unbothered, a powerful executive inconvenienced by a minor family drama. He shot me a look of pure contempt as he took his seat directly opposite me, a gunslinger ready for a duel he was sure he would win. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush, armed with nothing but his own arrogance. Finally, the door opened and my grandfather entered. He used a cane now, a recent concession to his age, and every step seemed deliberate, heavy. He didn't look at Thomas or my father. He walked to the head of the table, took his seat, and placed his hands flat on the polished wood. His eyes, though clouded by age, burned with a cold, clear fire. He looked down the length of the table directly at me and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. This emergency meeting of the board of Meridian Pharmaceuticals is now in session, he announced, his voice raspy but resonant, commanding immediate silence. Mr. James Mitchell has the floor. I stood up, my own reflection a pale, determined figure in the gleaming table. I didn't look at Thomas. I addressed the board. Members of the board, thank you for assembling on such short notice. I began, my voice steady and clear. I have called this meeting to present evidence of a clear and present danger to the financial health, ethical standing, and very future of this company. This threat does not come from a market competitor or a regulatory agency. It comes from within this room. I clicked the remote in my hand. The large presentation screen behind my grandfather flickered to life. The first slide was simple. A summary of Thomas's corporate American Express statement for the fiscal year. The total at the bottom read, $782,416. For the past 12 months, I explained, a corporate credit card assigned to board member Thomas Mitchell has been used to fund a lifestyle. This includes over $200,000 in luxury clothing from retailers in Milan and Paris, $150,000 in hotel suites in locations from street barts to Tokyo, and tens of thousands on personal dining. These are not business expenses. This is a pattern of systemic abuse of company resources. Thomas let out an exaggerated sigh. Oh, for God's sake, is that what this is about? My expense account? James, this is pathetic even for you. This is a family matter, not a federal case. Grandfather, are you really going to let him waste the board's time with this? My grandfather remained silent, his face an unreadable mask of stone. This is just the appetizer, Thomas, I said, without looking at him. I clicked to the next slide. It showed the incorporation documents for his shell company, Mitchell Global Strategy, and a series of invoices submitted to Meridian's marketing department. The invoices were for vague services like brand actualization and synergistic consulting, with price tags of $50,000 to $100,000 apiece. Mitchell Global Strategy has no other clients, no employees, and no physical office. I continued, my voice gaining a harder edge. It is a hollow corporate shell, created for the sole purpose of siphoning funds from this company. The invoices were submitted by Thomas Mitchell and approved by the head of marketing, a man Thomas hired and who reports directly to him. This isn't just abuse. This is a deliberate, calculated act of fraud. The independent directors were now exchanging alarmed glances. My father sank lower in his chair, his face ashen. Thomas's smirk was gone, replaced by a defensive scowl. Those were legitimate consultations. I was advising the company. On what? I shot back, turning to face him for the first time. On which champagne pairs best with embezzlement? On the thread count of sheets in a hotel suite paid for by the profits from drugs that save people's lives. The room was silent. I had him. He knew it. But I wasn't done. But even this, I said, turning back to the board, is not the primary threat. It is merely a symptom of a much deeper pathology of greed. The real danger lies in the debt Mr. Mitchell has accrued personally. The next slides detailed the millions in high-risk loans, listing the lenders and the predatory terms. I explained, in simple terms, how Thomas had used his unvested, future inheritance of Meridian stock as collateral, a direct violation of company bylaws for a board member. He has created a situation, I explained, where his personal financial ruin is directly tied to the company's stability. He has made this corporation, our corporation, a backstop for his gambling addiction. A gamble on a lifestyle he cannot afford and has not earned. This is my personal business. Thomas spat, his voice rising in panic. It has nothing to do with the company. It has everything to do with the company, I countered, my voice rising to match his. Because it explains what you did next. It explains your motive for the ultimate betrayal. I took a deep breath. This was the moment, the kill shot. For the past 6 months, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. Thomas Mitchell has been engaged in secret negotiations with Kensington Capital. A collective gasp went through the room. Kensington's reputation preceded them. They were corporate vultures. He was desperate, I explained. His lifestyle was catching up to him. He needed a massive, immediate infusion of cash. And he decided the best way to get it was to sell the company that bore his name, the legacy his grandfather built, for parts. That's a lie, Thomas screamed, leaping to his feet. A vicious, slanderous lie. You have no proof. You're just a jealous little snake trying to ruin me. Proof, I said quietly. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the digital audio recorder. I placed it gently on the center of the table. You're right, Thomas. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I wouldn't want the board to act on my word alone. I looked at him, my eyes boring into his. So let's hear yours. I pressed the play button. Thomas's voice, slick and utterly confident, filled the horrified silence of the boardroom. It was a recording of his call with the Kensington partner. Every word was a nail in his own coffin. Look, the old man is sentimental, he's losing it, the recorded voice of my brother said, followed by a smug laugh. He thinks the R&D division is some sacred cow. It's a cash drain. My Alzheimer's project? Please, that's a 10-year gamble. I'm not waiting 10 years. Once I get my full inheritance block, we partner with your guys at Kensington, we leverage it, and we take control. It's a simple majority. We can sell off the R&D division immediately. The patents alone are worth $1 billion. We dismantle the legacy, we take the cash, and we walk away. It's time to stop being a museum piece and start being a bank. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was absolute. It was damning. It was the sound of a man's entire world being reduced to ashes by his own words. Thomas stood there, frozen, his face a ghastly shade of white. The color had drained away, leaving behind a slack-jawed mask of pure terror. He looked at me, at the recorder, at the horrified faces of the board members. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His defense, his bluster, his entire identity had been vaporized. He turned, his eyes wide and pleading, to our father. George wouldn't look at him. He was staring at his own hands on the table as if he'd never seen them before. His shoulders slumped in the posture of a man utterly and completely defeated. Then Thomas looked at our grandfather. William's face was a study in heartbreak. It was the face of a man who had just watched his own son and heir volunteer to burn down his cathedral for the insurance money. The anger was there, but it was buried under an avalanche of sorrow. Slowly, painfully, William pushed his chair back and rose to his feet. He gripped his cane, his knuckles white. He did not look at anyone else. He stared only at his firstborn son. "For 36 years, William said, his voice a low, guttural rasp, thick with a pain that was almost physical. "I have protected you. I have enabled you. I have made excuses for you. I told myself you were just ambitious. I told myself you had potential." He shook his head, a slow, mournful motion. "I was wrong. You are not ambitious. You are a black hole of need. You do not build. You only consume." He lifted his gaze to the rest of the board. His voice regained its command, the CEO taking over from the broken-hearted father. "I, William Mitchell, as chairman and majority shareholder, make a motion," he declared, his voice ringing with finality. "A motion to immediately and permanently remove Thomas Mitchell from the board of directors of this company for gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "And I make a second motion, to strip Thomas Mitchell of all future executive appointments and to place his inherited voting shares into a new, irrevocable trust. A trust to be managed solely in the best interests of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, with a trustee to be appointed by this board." He looked down the table, his eyes finally landing on me. "I nominate James Mitchell as that trustee." He fixed his gaze on the board members. "All in favor of the motions as stated?" One by one, the hands went up. The 3 independent directors, their faces grim with resolve. Marcus Reynolds, his hand shooting up with conviction. My hand. There was one last holdout. My father. He sat there, paralyzed, his face a mess of conflicting loyalties. Then, with a shuddering breath that was almost a sob, he slowly, agonizingly, raised his hand. "The motions carry unanimously," my grandfather said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He collapsed back into his chair, the strength finally leaving him. "This meeting is adjourned." It was over. Thomas didn't yell. He didn't protest. He just stood there, a hollowed-out man, his ruin absolute and complete. He had been executed not by a rival, but by his own reflection, shown to him in the unforgiving light of a boardroom. They arrived one by one. My parents, George and Margaret, looked older, more tired, but less tense. They brought a simple apple pie, one my mother had baked herself. It was probably the first thing she'd baked in 20 years. Thomas and Rebecca came next. They were driving a modest Honda, not a Bentley. Thomas was wearing a simple sweater, Rebecca a dress that was tasteful but not designer. The change was jarring. They looked like normal people. They brought a bottle of wine, a mid-range Cabernet, and handed it to me with an awkward formality. Ethan was the bridge. He ran in and immediately hugged me, then proudly showed Sarah his latest report card, all A's from his public school. He was thriving. We sat down at the dining table. The silence was thick with everything that had been said and done, with the ghosts of 1,000 past arguments. It was my grandfather who broke it. He had recovered well from the shock of the past year, and while he moved more slowly, his eyes were sharp. He raised his glass. "Last year," he began, his voice clear and strong, "this family learned a hard lesson. We learned that a name is just a name. We learned that value isn't something you inherit. It's something you build." He looked around the table, his eyes lingering on each of us. "I'm not thankful for what we lost. I'm thankful for what we were forced to find. I'm thankful that we are all still here, trying." He looked directly at me and raised his glass higher. "To James," he said, "who taught an old man that his true legacy isn't a company, but the character of the people who lead it." Everyone raised their glass, even Thomas. His eyes met mine across the table. There wasn't friendship in them, not yet, but the hatred was gone. In its place was something new, something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was a grudging respect. Later, as we were clearing the plates, Ethan ran up to me and handed me a folded piece of construction paper. It was a card. On the front was a crayon drawing of two stick figures, one tall and one small, holding hands. Inside, in a child's shaky handwriting, it said, "To Uncle James. Thank you for teaching me how to stand on my own 2 feet." I felt a lump form in my throat. I looked across the room at Sarah, who was laughing with my mother. I saw my father talking quietly with my grandfather. I saw Thomas helping Rebecca clear the table. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The cracks were still there. But it was real. It was a family, broken and bruised, but slowly, painfully, trying to piece itself back together in a new, more honest way. I looked out the window at the falling snow. A new season was beginning, not just for the city, but for the Mitchell family. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly a part of it.